Hello, my friends. Welcome once again to the Habitus. My name's Michael Pattison. I'm here once again with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
And again, we have 4 films to proceed through today. In chronological order, we have To Have and Have Not, Howard Hawks' wartime classic, which I have chosen for us to watch. And we also have California Split, Robert Altman's 1974 gambling comedy drama. Bobby, what have you chosen for us to watch?
I've chosen a film that we've both seen previously, 1988's Beetlejuice, directed by Tim Burton, and also a film that I had seen previously that you hadn't, although I hadn't seen it in many years, Shinya Tsukamoto's 2004 drama, let's say, Vital or Vital, depending on who you talk to.
And who am I talking to today? Is it Vital or Vital for you?
Well, we'll come to that when we get to the film.
Okay, but first of all, let's go straight into it. To Have and Have Not.
What's the matter, Harry? Quiet. Thought I saw something out there. Listen.
What is it?
I don't know. Shut up. Hey, you hear that?
Is it the patrol boat?
Don't you know those engines? Sounds like she's off there. All right, stand by that wheel. Now, wait a minute. Give me that gun.
You can't fight them guys, Harry.
What's the matter with you, Eddie? This is where you ought to be telling me how good you are.
I can do it. What do you want me to do?
Well, we're lucky nothing. If we're not, hook her up and get away from here fast.
What does this mean, Mr. Morgan?
Trouble if they see us.
What can we do?
You can't do anything. Just get down on the deck flat and stay there. Although I don't know what good it's going to do you.
If you try to resist with that, you will
Please,
get us all
listen.
killed.
Shut up, both of you. Get down on the deck flat. You save France, I'm going to save my boat. Hook her up, Eddie, and let's go.
Faire volonté. Oui, chef. Restez à votre poste. Oui, monsieur.
Okay, so Fort-de-France, Martinique, 1940. Just after the fall of France, which has rendered Martinique to be under the control of Vichy France, American Harry Morgan, played by Humphrey Bogart, operates the Queen Conch, a small fishing boat for tourists, with his alcoholic mate and pal Eddie, played by Walter Brennan. When Harry's approached by likeable hotel owner Frenchie, played by Marcel Dalio, to help smuggle some French resistance fighters off the island, he refuses, upholding a staunchly apolitical stance regarding the present unfolding situation. Soon after, Harry meets Slim, Lauren Bacall, a younger American who has just arrived in Martinique and with whom he forms an immediate mutual attraction. When Harry is taken into custody with Slim by the local police force following the death of one of his clients, he eventually reluctantly decides to help Frenchie's pals in the French resistance get off the island because he's in need of the money. And needless to say, Slim and Eddie are at hand to help. Now, at the top of the show, I didn't mention this. I'd seen this film previously. You hadn't, Bobby. I chose it on the grounds that I had Scarface, Hawks' 1932 film, ready to watch. Long overdue discovery for me. And I just wanted to sort of revisit a Hawks film alongside a one that I hadn't, which is held highly. It's held in high regard. Based on a Ernest Hemingway novel, written by William Faulkner with several others, credited and otherwise, one of whom was Jules Furthman, produced by Hawks and Jack Warner for Warner Brothers, released in 1944. My understanding, I haven't read the book, but it was set in Cuba, the novel. Yeah. And in order to sort of placate the American government at the time, which was wanting to sort of keep a friendly neighbours policy, the setting got changed to Martinique, as a result of which, as I'm sure you'll agree, it resembles a film that I know you have seen, which was made 2 years before, Michael Curtis's Casablanca.
Yeah.
You like that film, if I recall.
Yeah, although, again, I haven't seen that film in, I don't know, 16, 17 years, probably.
Okay, a dutiful watch as a growing cinephile.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
And
bought
this
the
one...
DVD with the glowing quote from Roger Ebert on the front.
Oh, right, okay. My DVD of Casablanca is one of those, I don't know the terms, when the discs, like, they pop open, like it's like a cardboard disc.
Is it a cardboard sleeve?
Cardboard, yeah, sorry, not a cardboard disc. You'd have trouble playing that. Yeah, cardboard sleeve, yeah, with like a...
It's like white, it's a white, yeah. I think that's the same one. It has a quote, I think, on the top from Roger Ebert.
Yeah, cardboard discs.
Yeah,
Anyway,
so, my memory of Casablanca is pretty dim, but it feels bizarrely similar to Casablanca for a film for Bogart to have chosen to do, to the extent that I wonder to what extent he did choose to do this film as opposed to having signed on to a slightly different film that transformed into this film, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get what. Yeah, the thing that sort of changes this or keeps it sort of different, I suppose, from Casablanca, enduringly, over the years, and I suppose immediately at the time, is Lauren Bacall's presence, who replaces, if you like, Ingrid Bergman, with whom, Bogart had a connection and a chemistry in Casablanca, but here I think things are taken to another level. Would you agree? I mean, that's what the film's sort of famous for, their chemistry and their connection on screen and the erotic charge of everything, and then, how it led to their sort of relationship, etc., etc., which are things that are easily mythologized. Would you agree that it's evident in the film or not?
I would certainly agree with the last thing you said, that it's easily mythologized. I think... Okay, so I didn't enjoy this film, and I was really, really surprised to not enjoy it, because I think this was my 7th Howard Hawks film, and I've really enjoyed all the other ones, and this film has a really, really high reputation. So I was fully prepared to really enjoy it, and again, I had that familiar feeling 30, 40 minutes into the film of like, it's not working. Like at that point you should be involved and engrossed, and I was not. And well, I mean, I have a whole list of complaints here, but to answer your question, not particularly. I see it in certain moments, but I think the relationship, particularly because of the way that the Bacall character is written or not written, is very, very shallow compared to the relationship that Bogart's character in Casablanca has with Bergman's character, because that comes with a past. That comes with a history that is not here at all. And I do like I said, the last thing you said there about it being easily mythologized. Ultimately, when I was thinking about it afterwards, I wondered, is that why the film is so well liked and so highly regarded? Is it because it's sort of seen as encapsulating the genesis of like one of the great Hollywood romances? Is it kind of like a paratextual value assigned to this film, where it doesn't really have anything to do necessarily with the inherent qualities of the film, and has much more to do with what the film is seen as representing in sort of a kind of idealized Hollywood history?
I get that. I understand where you're coming from. Funnily enough, first time I watched it, I was more taken in by and drawn to Bogart and Brennan's on-screen chemistry.
Brennan, Eddie, you're right? Yeah, sure, okay,
yeah. I thought Brennan was fantastic as Eddie, the drunkard, who
he's good,
is, kind of likable, but also kind of a liability. There's a point in the film at which Bogart doesn't know if he can trust him with regard to if he's held in custody and he suffers, or is made to suffer, withdrawal symptoms and cold turkey from the alcohol, then it'll weaken him in terms of his loyalty. And I found that sort of relationship more sort of valuable and meaningful in the context of the story.
Sure.
And because I agreed, like Slim's either underwritten or not written at all, and she's made to just sort of wander around the set of the film, really.
Yeah.
And she kind of appears when she needs to, etc., etc. When she does, I find Bacall kind of amazing, I must say.
Yeah, it's a case of doing a lot with very little. Sure.
Yeah. I mean,
when you sorry, go ahead.
No. You please continue.
When you read about how the film was produced, like you mentioned, it was changes were made to the setting, and but also in the mornings they would read through new pages that had been written the night before by Faulkner.
Yeah.
And then they would shoot those pages in the afternoon, and that kind of explains why. And they would change. They would say, "Oh no, that line would be better. I want to say that line. What about if she said that line instead?" And they would just kind of like swap the lines around. And it explains why the plot never comes together. It never feels like it takes off, or it develops the kind of the energy that it seems to promise when he's presented with this proposal at the beginning of the film to aid in the resistance. And I agree with you that the relationship between Harry and Eddie is more interesting. I think that's, again, like their history and the responsibility and the affection that Harry feels toward Eddie. I would have been more interested in a story about that. And in terms of the plot, the two like Dolores Moran or Moran and who is it who plays? Walter Survey, Paul and Helene de Bersac, the two resistance members.
Yeah,
that Harry does end up helping. I wanted that plot and the conflict with the local Vichy authorities and, like you said, Eddie's potential, like the liability that and Eddie exploited by the authorities as a way to kind of get to Harry, and like that's all there. And like, to me, Bacall lifts out of the movie.
Yeah. Because I guess here the Helene de Bersac, the Dolores Moran character, is Ingrid Bergman, and it's her with whom Harry would have the connection and relationship. But in this film,
right,
that's not a complicated
relationship.
Yeah. It in some ways this feels.
Although
like...
she wasn't she the love interest originally, and it was the emphasis was shifted by Hawks onto the Bacall character because of his real life interest in Bacall.
Yeah,
his real life romantic interest in her.
Yeah, which again reinforces that mythology of like the film being the film itself emerging from and morphing around real life sort of chemistries.
The film is kind of an artifact of these like real life interactions and relationships, less as a work of fiction, more as a kind of like a valuable historical artifact for people writing histories of Hollywood and screen romances.
Sure, and I've never really, to be honest, found Bogart all that enthralling or charismatic as a male presence.
Sure,
and I think his like imagistically, like his age in this film is so sort of exacerbated by the fact that Bacall's like clearly a 19-year-old, and it's just it's a wee bit strange, if I may say so.
Yeah, and I also that's a good point too, because I also feel that she, and I've a lot of people have said this about some of the roles that Jennifer Lawrence has played, like for example her role in American Hustle, where she seems to be just playing a character who's like 5 years older than she is. She's playing a little bit too much above her age, and she doesn't seem to embody a character of that stage of life or whatever. Bacall, I think, is directed to act a lot older than 19 in this as well. And originally the climax of the film was supposed to be we heard the clip of the first shootout. There was supposed to be another shootout that was supposed to end the movie. And they didn't film it for whatever reason, and Howard Hawks gave it to John Huston, and he used it in Key Largo.
Okay.
The climax of Key Largo.
Yeah.
So Dolores Moran was originally supposed to be the lead, and she was supposed to be Bogart's romantic interest.
Which would have made
that's natural. It's just like when you take all the plot elements into account, like that's the story. Like what is Bacall's character doing in here?
Yeah.
Except disrupting that for reasons completely, external to the film.
I get you.
The screenplay was rewritten to like the public interest in the real life romance between Bacall and Bogart and so on.
At a time when such things were even more kind of incessant and pervasive than perhaps they are today, because the whole studio star system was manufactured, oiled, and sold in a different way. Nevertheless, I do find strengths in this film. I do think it happens to be a very, very good one, worthy of its acclaim, perhaps for different reasons, though. I think there's a certain, and again, this could be sort of perceived to be a criticism. I love its sort of how its languid pace almost intensifies its atmosphere. Again, you could read that as a complete, plodding weakness of the script, but the sense that everyone's sort of trapped on this colony, and there isn't really a way out, and there's simultaneously a sense of urgency, and yet this idea that it's become an everyday reality, and therefore has sort of lost its urgency.
Okay, I actually feel exactly the opposite way about it.
Okay.
Because, again, to compare it to Casablanca, in Casablanca, Bogart's character owns the bar. And that's where, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen it in 16 years, but he's the bar owner, right?
Yeah, it's Rick's Cafe, yeah.
Right, okay, so he is, that's where he lives, that's where he works, that's where his business is. So he is not trapped, but he has ties there. And the question of whether he's going to aid in the resistance is an urgent question for him, and his attempt to remain at a distance from it is complicated and conflicted and difficult. And in this case, he has no ties to this place. He can get on his boat and go. It's actually, for me, completely lacking in that respect. The only thing that puts him in a difficult position here is that his money is taken in a kind of a much more contrived kind of plot device. His money and passport are taken in a raid on the place by the Vichy authorities. So I think he's too potentially uninvolved in this resistance thing. And then when you have the fact that he ultimately does agree to take part in this just because of that contrivance that his money and passport have been taken away, in doing that completely removes Bacall from the film for 20 minutes. She has no connection to it at all.
It does. She literally
they just go off on this side adventure, and you're watching it, and you see the introduction of the Helene character, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious that was the story originally, and there's a kind of a late introduction of some sort of the beginnings of a kind of a love triangle element, with Bacall's character Slim demonstrating some amount of jealousy toward Elaine.
Yeah.
But it's just not enough. It's
don't you find the development of Harry? I mean, we keep calling him Harry, but in the most famous scene in the film, Slim calls him Steve. You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve?
Nicknamed.
Yeah.
Nicknamed Steve. Yeah.
But that's my fault. But
I don't understand that line, by the way.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve?
I don't get
you
it.
Just put your lips together and.
Right.
Well, I mean,
is it a very crude innuendo, or is it supposed to be some sort of other reference that,
that's specific to American culture at the time or something? I think I've always taken it to be a kind of crude reference. I know it firstly as a sample on one of the Ultimate Lessons by Steinsky, and which I heard well before I watched the film. And so when I first watched it, I was like, oh, that's it. So I was just pleased to have put another sample and origin to check off. But don't you find it interesting how the Bogart character here is stripped of the things that anchor him to the place, which ultimately in Casablanca make him endearing. He's less endearing here as a result of his intentions and driving influences, because it's simply just money. You know, he's in the tourist industry, and his apolitics are sort of self-preservationist as a result of that. And yet his you know, a bit like Treat Williams in Deep Rising many episodes ago. He's not as immediately sort of charming, no. And I think that, like, as a story, let's say that is.
You're saying he's not as immediately charming as Treat Williams in Deep Rising.
Yeah, but no, and also as Rick in Casablanca, because the ingredients in his scripted life that anchor him to that place and make his arc dramatic and tense are being taken away. And basically, he's there, and he does what he does in the film, this one, because of money.
What is being taken away?
Like, so, in scripting this film, Hawks et al. Have decided to free him of the fact that he owns a bar. You know, if this was to be seen as a conscious remake of Casablanca, what you just alluded to there, that the things that make his arc in Casablanca complicated and dramatically tense and everything else, they're not here in this film, so that he, you know, we've got no real sort of connection to him or something to root for. And I was just wondering if that
is that a good thing?
Well, ostensibly not. But
no connection to him,
but no reason to root for him. But ostensibly not. But my question was, do you not find that interesting in itself, that we're asked to sort of, you know, to begin with this apolitical character and see how then that changes into him helping French resistance fighters escape the island?
Yeah, I mean, like the French resistance storyline is the most important part of the film, the most compelling part of the film. In fact, the only compelling part of the film. But it's given so little time because so much time is given over to you know, the Bogart-Bacall thing, which has absolutely no connection to any of the resistance stuff. I mean, like, the final scene of the movie is Bacall's character saying goodbye to Cricket, the piano player, as though that meant anything. Who's Cricket? Like, he's just the guy who plays the piano in the bar. It's like we're no insight into their relationship at all. She sings a song at one point with him, and also the title, To Have and Have Not. Apparently, the Hemingway novel has like heavy class themes,
right, that
are completely removed from the film, so the title doesn't actually apply to the content here at all.
I think you know, I don't want to sort of argue my case too much here. I did think less of it this time round. Dan Seymour, maybe the highlight, if it isn't Walter Brennan as Eddie, Dan Seymour as Capitan Renard, who takes...
Yeah, sure, I would have loved more of him.
Takes Steve and Slim into custody. He's great, you know, a real sort of a whispering harshness to his presence.
But not quite. We're not given... I don't think we're given... we need a scene where he demonstrates his kind of ruthlessness or his cruelty, and we don't get that, I think, in order to really create a sense of peril, particularly in relation to Eddie.
Yes. Okay.
It's just so, like, when you put all the pieces together here, I think it's so obvious that this was one story that was kind of recklessly haphazardly transformed into something else, and it's now this kind of like weird mutated thing that doesn't work. But there are a lot of there's a version of this story that works really well, I think. And number one, first thing you do is take Bacall's character out of the movie.
Blasphemy.
Or cast Bacall as Elaine de Bursac or whatever, but the Slim character needs to go, or be, you know, just the girl who sings with Cricket or whatever, and which is probably what she originally was. Yeah. Before you know, Hawks set his designs on her. But what do you think of the film stylistically compared to Curtis's direction of Casablanca?
Well, it feels
It's a bit
sort
plain,
of
isn't it?
soulless.
Soulless.
Yeah, if I may say so. Like,
I agree. I think it's very plain and
yeah,
there's not a lot.
yeah,
in
it's
there.
functional. I mean, like, I said the languid atmosphere sort of intensifies the atmosphere. The languid pace, intensifies the in-scene atmosphere. That comes as a sort of double-edged thing, though, because I think a large part of that is informed by how, as I say, like sort of soulless and functional the design of the film seems visually.
Have you seen Casablanca recently?
No, not recently at all. But I really want to.
I remember it being very beautiful and very kind of like having the kind of like this woozy kind of like romantic visual style.
Yeah,
that really complemented the kind of complemented all of those the elements of the drama in that film with the Bogart character's conflict over remaining distance and like helping the resistance, and also his kind of painful past with the Bergman character and all of that kind of thing, and a great sense of place, and all of which is lacking here. And maybe it's unfair to lean so heavily into the comparison, but it's kind of unavoidable.
No, I was going to say it is unavoidable, and I suppose if you're going to address this film structurally, or even before we get into the visuals of it, just plot and everything. I mean, you have to address the fact that this film is heavily indebted, consciously or otherwise, to Casablanca. What would you give it out of 10?
I gave it a 4.
Oof. It's one of those that...
Which sorry, can I just sorry, actually, I just wanted to ask you as well. What have you abandoned your star system now?
Yes. Under, may I say, the most sort of persistent co-host pressure. Yes, I have. I've abandoned.
I've been nothing but supportive of the star system.
I've abandoned my star system with your feigned enthusiasm that was borderline mocking whenever you brought it up each episode. So
I've slightly adjusted my rating system and made it. I said on a previous episode that I associated the various numbers with adjectives. Yeah. But I've changed it to something I think more resembling the way that you had yours before, where it emphasizes subjectivity. So it's just like, so I said that I gave this a 4 out of 10. For me, that means that I would say that I disliked it, but I would have like reservations about saying that.
Right. Okay.
Whereas like a 3 out of 10 would be, no, I disliked it and I don't have any reservations about saying that.
Yeah, yeah.
4, there are elements here that I do appreciate and enjoy, but overall, on balance, I would have to give it a thumbs down.
The way my 10 system works, so that each integer can mean 2 different things, like depending on what mood I'm in or the memory of the film or whatever. So like at best, like a 9 out of 10 is let's go in the middle of the scale. So at best, a 5 is like didn't dislike it. At worst, it's bordering on disliking the film. So it's like,
sure, five for me is also this kind of liminal space where it's like I wouldn't quite say I disliked it and I wouldn't quite say I liked it. But then 6, 7, 8, 9, and 4, 3, 2, 1 are opposites of each other. So for me, 6 is liked it with reservations, 7 is liked it,
sure.
8 is liked it a lot, and 9 is loved it.
Yeah.
And then 4 is disliked it with reservations, 3 is disliked it, 2 is disliked it a lot, and 1 is hated it.
Okay.
And then 10 is obviously reserved for that extra little that extra little boost to long-time favorites.
I remember way back when you and I scored films out of 4 or 5 or whatever, and we never
4.
We never gave
with a 0 with a 0.
0
so it was
out of 4, so it was technically out of 5. But you never. I mean, you're laughing there, but that's what I've just converted from. Anyway, we would never give full marks to a film on first viewing. Is that still true? Or have you given 10s to something on a first viewing?
Well, I wouldn't like straight out of the cinema give a 10.
Eyes of My Mother?
I can't remember if because I did watch it a second time. I can't remember if I gave it a 10 before. I'm not sure that I did. But one film, oh no, maybe I did. Anyway, but I on, extensive reflection, I could bump it up to a 10 maybe if it sticks with me in a certain way. But Still relatively stingy with my tens.
Yeah, see, technically, like on extreme extensive reflection, it can be bumped up, but for me, it always requires that rewatch.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so to answer your question, I have reverted to my 10 scale now. So you're gonna get a straight score out of 10 here with no translation required. I did give this an 8, right? But and it's maybe the first time this has happened live on air. You've convinced me. You've swayed me away from sort of that position. It's weird because watching a film like this, I tend, and I definitely, one of the reasons for choosing it was to sort of force myself into watching films of this era with a more critical sort of framework or mindset, because I do tend, and I hate myself for it, to be a little more generous to films from the 40s, films that are referred to and appreciated as, and taken for granted as classics.
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean,
yeah, but then again, in the course of like discussing this film in the context of what came before it, i.e., Casablanca, you then have to then address what are quite clearly weaknesses in relation to that film. So, yeah, maybe it's not an 8 out of 10, but I don't know. I don't know how else to sort of.
But the extreme emphasis on subjectivity on my scale means that I can't be swayed.
Yeah, see, yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
I know, of course you can. You can be prompted to see it in a different way, from a different perspective.
Yeah. Let's. Shall we move on? 30 years.
Shall we move on to
30 years ahead? California Split.
I carried you 1 year. Am I right?
Yeah?
Was there any pressure put on you at all?
No, you were very nice.
Forget nice. I don't give a fuck about nice.
Well, that year...
Look, please, let's forget about this now. The point is, it's totally different. It's strictly on a cash basis. I told you that.
Right.
Did I tell you that I got hurt in 2 busts? That my parents were out here? That I'm getting killed all over the fucking place? I mean, I told you this up front. Did I not tell you that? I'm asking you a question. Did I not tell you that? Okay, I beat you. 10 days later, you come to me and you don't have any money. You're out of line already, babe. But I extend that. I extended it to you. You told me you're going to have the cash, right? You told me you got things going. I don't know what you're saying to me, but you're going to have the money. You got a way to get the money. Did you not say that? What you're trying to tell me is come payoff day, you don't have $1, plus you owe me more. Man, I heard it before. You don't have $1, do you?
Spunk.
You gotta think I'm some super schmuck you're dealing with. Well, I gotta tell you something, pal. In my line of thinking, you took a total out-and-out shot at me, and that don't settle.
It, Buck, that's not it at all.
Well, what is it, babe?
Well, listen to me. I got $700 for you tomorrow.
But why didn't you say that in the beginning? Why didn't you say it?
Because you didn't give me a chance.
Okay, so in a Los Angeles casino, Charlie Walters, played by Elliot Gould, meets fellow gambler Bill Denny, played by George Segal, during a poker game at which they are both accused of being in cahoots. Not long after they exit the casino and enjoy a drink, they're robbed of their winnings. Charlie, who lives with 2 prostitutes, Barbara, played by Anne Prentice, and Susan, played by Gwen Wells, is the more experienced gambler of the 2. But Bill, who works for a magazine during the day and who is also in debt, finds his gambling addictions further enabled by Charlie. The 2 eventually travel up to Reno, where Bill wins a lot of money. Thin synopsis. Rambling film. It's a highly enjoyable film, this. I hadn't seen it before. Again, similar to Have and Have Not, I recommended it because I have a few Altmans that I'm wanting to see in order to sort of fill my large gaps in his filmography, and this was one that I felt would be a good one to watch. You hadn't seen it before either. Are you generally an Altman fan?
Yeah. I think this was my 11th Altman film.
Okay.
My favorite is McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which he made a couple of years before this. You said this is a very enjoyable film. I ran kind of hot and cold on it, but when I came out the other end, I also would say that I liked it. And as you said, it's a very thin synopsis because half an hour in, I wrote plot question mark.
Yeah, I mean,
because I was like, okay, is this going to be nothing but a kind of a subcultural milieu, kind of, you know, kind of a sort of episodic journey through this subculture?
Yeah.
Also, I should say, I thought this was a crime movie when I sat
Right.
down to it. I thought that
Okay.
this was about some sort of like con or grift or something like that these gamblers were going to pull off, but it isn't at all. Neither of them are crooks. There are crooks kind of on the periphery of the story. There's the guy that we just heard in the clip, the loan shark guy.
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
And I also, as I said, I kind of ran a little bit hot and cold on it. I found myself kind of tiring. The scenes are quite long, generally, and I found myself kind of tiring of certain scenes, like particularly scenes where they're gambling, you know, where they're
Right.
like playing craps or something, and it's kind of going on a little bit too long for my tastes. We'll come to my tastes in a second. And it is, so 45 minutes into the film, I wrote funny, ? And I also wrote depth to characters, ? Because at that point my patience was wearing thin, and I was going, okay, is this it? Because the film is intermittently quite funny. It has some scenes that are really, really funny. But overall, I wouldn't quite say that it's like a hilariously funny film. And at that point, I also thought that it was, except for its kind of maybe arguably sociological or even kind of the subcultural portrait value that it might have, dramatically it was extremely shallow at that point. And then 3 minutes later, it demonstrated its depths. Right, so I was just in time.
It redeemed itself.
48 minutes in, we get the scene that we just heard in the clip, or
Right.
the scene just before that, I think, where he's on the phone to that guy.
Yeah.
In his office
At work, yeah.
and we realize, okay, that this guy is like getting in over his head, and this is George Segal's character.
Yeah.
George Siegel. Mispronouncing everyone's names today. George Siegel's character, Bill Denny, is getting in over his head with his gambling debts, and we can kind of see, and at that point I turned on the movie positively and realized what it was doing, where it's presenting this veneer of recreation and exhilaration, which conceals a reality of compulsion and desperation. And it reminded me of when I was on holiday in Las Vegas like 10 years ago. That's how I felt about it there. I felt like it was the saddest place in the world, putting on the happiest smile that it could.
I can believe it.
And you see all these types, like all these people, and it just looks, it looks like such a seedy, miserable place that's trying to be super attractive as this. Like it's not a nice place, in my opinion, and that's why I said we'd come back to like my tastes here.
Yeah.
Do you have kind of like a gambling streak? Like, do you enjoy gambling?
I've never gambled in my life, so
Really?
I have friends who gamble, and I've been to racing tracks, horses and dogs before with friends who enjoy gambling in that context, and who will casually well. Is that a right term? Casually? They gamble. So
Sure. Yeah.
there's nothing casual about it, I suppose. They gamble.
Well, as opposed to doing it compulsively, I suppose.
as opposed to doing it like professionally or
compulsively,
Yeah. And they'll, place bets on a weekly basis with football, etc., etc. But I have literally never gambled in my life. And
What about even playing like poker or something like that with friends?
I don't know the rules of poker, so I may have placed an obligatory bet on a roulette wheel once, only because the only way you could be in the casino after hours was to and to drink was to be gambling. So it was always just a means by which I could have another pint without getting kicked out of a place. But I find that the general milieus, like you mentioned, depressing. I've been in casinos, as I say again, as a sort of necessary evil after hours when nightclubs and bars close in the UK, and they have a by design a very strange sense of temporality. So
they have no windows and no clocks.
No clocks, no windows. And as an approximation of that milieu, this film also has a very strange temporality. So when like the opening scene seems to go on and on and on in such a way that it suggests that these guys are in cahoots. Like you said, I thought this was
that they were,
as some sort of constructed plan or crime.
When they show up in the bar afterwards and they pretend, I thought he was pretending not to know him, and that they were doing a kind of kind of like. Yeah,
me too. I thought that was the routine, and I was finding it incredibly funny because Elliot Gould's energy is just in stark comparison to George Segal's. Yeah. But which I found, great, and it's tense, and it's kind of, again, there's that word, languid manner. But and then obviously this film takes place across a certain time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not really quite sure of it. I mean, Gould disappears for much of it.
It's quite elliptical, it is.
Yeah, the scene that we've just heard, these kind of disappeared from the plot. Anyway, to come back to your tastes, I'm guessing you're going to agree with all of that I've just said.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have the I have gambled, but I've not like high stakes, Casino Royale kind of.
You haven't won 82 grand in a casino or craps before, I'm guessing.
Gone out and defibrillated myself. No, I mean, I've little bits here and there, slot machines, and have played poker in the past as well. I remember as a teenager when my friends and I started playing poker. Looking back on it now, I can see that I never liked it. I never enjoyed it, and I mean, okay, whatever. I'm sure people enjoy poker, but my feeling now is that it was kind of seen as the mature thing to do. Like we're gonna drink beers and we're gonna play poker and we're gonna bet real money, and but I think it's a boring game. I think it's a really boring game, and I would rather be playing any number of board games or something that are
sure.
Because I mean the money aspect of it, it's so boring that I always was kind of doing okay for a little while, but eventually I just got so bored that I lost interest and stopped paying attention and lost all my money. But when it comes to gambling, and particularly gambling addiction, I have this kind of weird, not weird, actually, I'm sure it's pretty common, mixture of kind of sympathy or pity and total incomprehension. I just don't, I don't get why you don't just stop. Because don't you, they all understand, and we do see this depicted in the movie, but they all understand, I'm sure, the odds. They all understand mathematically that the casino is rigged to win. But then we see the weird superstitious culture that goes with the scene where Elliot Gould is on the bus and he won't give up his seat to the woman because the last time he gave up his seat he had a lousy streak at the casino, whatever. Yeah. And he's trying to get other people to give up their seats, and they all have their own weird little superstitious reasons why they won't do this. They won't sit facing the wrong way on the bus because that last time they lost whatever. And I remember when I was in Vegas, they didn't, at that point, they didn't have any cash on the casino floor. Right. So they had, you would put money into a slot machine. You could put a dollar bill into the slot machine. And if you won, the little cash dispenser tray at the bottom had a speaker in it that made the sound of money falling into the tray, but it would actually print you out a token that you took up to the cash desk to exchange for money.
Yeah.
They wanted a minimum of cash on the casino floor for obvious reasons. But as a result of that, people had these casino issued kind of credit cards attached to almost old style coiled phone cords attached to their belts that they would plug into the slot machines and just sit there for hours pressing the button over and over again like zombies. And I remember looking at them and thinking you poor bastard, what's wrong with you? It's really a certain kind of mind that just gets addicted to it, and I as I said, this my feeling toward it is a mixture of kind of pity and incomprehension, because it's not in me at all. I don't have the impulse at all.
Do you find that addiction in general, even substance addiction, do you feel the same way?
No, I think I can kind of wrap my head more around an addiction to something. I know that technically there's not that much of a line between it because you're addicted to the neurochemicals and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like injecting like a substance into your body or whatever, I can understand like that physical addiction more, you know. But no, I mean it's similar art. Yeah,
I ask in the context of like dramatizations of it, because I find dramatization of addiction, and I've mentioned this on a previous episode, maybe in response to Requiem for a Dream, but by necessity it's repetitive, right? In order to convey the nature of addiction, the structure of the film then has to be repetitive. And I feel the same with like there's that middle section of, you know, Breaking Bad where Aaron Paul's character is just like, you know, falling back into the same kinds of mechanisms again and again and again. And it's kind of exhausting to watch and tedious to watch. I mean, I love Breaking Bad, don't get me wrong. It takes a very acute sensitivity and script to pull it off, I think. But like, you know, alcoholism, junkies, gamblers, I find them just not very interesting as dramatic subjects. And I think to its credit, this film sort of keeps that at a distance, the dark underside of it. I mean, it's...
I remember watching Rob Zombie's The Lords of Salem, where he made... I'm going to rewatch it soon because a lot of people really like it, but I remember being like amazed at the at the misjudgment of the choice that he makes halfway through the movie, where he has his protagonist relapse onto heroin and she's just strung out on her bed for the rest of the movie. Kind of kills the momentum. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say, like, the loose causal framework and the rambling style of it. I mean, the whole thing plays out like a subplot that would happen in the ellipsis between two, you know, sequences in a film of a much better structured film. Ostensibly, I say better as in like conventional. And I think that works to the film's credit, to be honest, that it doesn't sort of, like, we're not aware, as you mentioned, we're not aware of Bill's problems or addictions until maybe halfway through the film. Or something that feels like halfway through. And, you know, the first half unfolds like a kind of like just a lad's comedy. Like, you know, I think like Gold's energy is amazing. Like some of the lines that he comes out with and like his acting, you know, he's the kind of guy, and I think this bleeds back into what you just said there about like the nature of compulsion and gambling. They're not in it for the money here; they're in it for the thrill because
it's a lifestyle that has no end point. It's not like it's not like a long con or anything like that. They're not planning on cashing out at any point. Like even when Bill wins all that money in Reno in the third, we won't say the third act, but like the you know, the final stretch of the film, Charlie's only thought on it is how long they can live at the track with that money. You know, that'll keep us for 10 years at the track. Like, oh my God, like all you're thinking about for the next 10 years is just like betting on horses.
And what's incredible about that though is that I'm on a completely different wavelength, like yourself. And for me, as watching the film, there's a horrible tension unique to watching gamblers while they're up, because you know that that tension's informed by the fact that they're going to lose it, and so, you know, we have it drilled into us that the optimistic outcome here is that they win the money, as if the rest of their lives won't be corrupted by that winning jackpot. And you know, Gold, I think, is amazing as a guy who is flush despite living extremely precariously, and who's good company despite his habits. You know, like
that's kind of what I mean when I say that the film, I think it's actually, when you think about it in these terms, it's a very intelligently structured film because it presents you with that veneer of recreation and exhilaration, and then it reveals what exists underneath it. But it never really goes as dark as I expected it to go. Once I realized, once that element of Bill's gambling debts was introduced, I expected what I expected to happen when they were in Reno was that Bill would be up, and he'd be up more, and he'd be up more, but he wouldn't be able to step away, and he would ultimately leave even more in debt when he could have stepped away, or even set aside what he owes to Sparky, the loan shark. He could have set aside whatever. It's like $1,500 he owes him or something like that, or whatever it is. and he wins. What does he win?
82,000 he's up at one point.
82,000, yeah. So he, I expected it to go a lot darker. I expected him to, because at one point he gets a knock on the door from a guy who works for Sparky.
Yeah.
And at that point I thought, oh well, we're gonna have a really. There's a scene in Nicholas Winding Refn's Pusher where somebody, spoiler alert for Pusher, there's a scene so disturbing and horrifying and pity-inducing in Pusher that I was like shocked, and I couldn't even process the scene that came after it. It's a suicide scene that emerges out of. I know you haven't seen Pusher, so I won't.
I have seen Pusher. I watched it.
Oh, have you seen Pusher?
Yeah, I watched it over the Christmas New Year period. Yeah.
You know this suicide scene that I'm talking about, where they're trying to squeeze money out of this guy who's like desperate.
Can I just say, it's a fucking good job I have seen it, because you were just gonna spoil it. Anyway, yeah, please continue.
But yeah, no, he just grabs the gun and just shoots himself in the face.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh man, it's such a powerful scene.
Yeah,
that's kind of. I didn't expect it maybe to go so dark as that, because it's a Robert Altman movie, but I expected darker things from it.
Well, when I was watching it, I couldn't get Mean Streets out of my head, because I thought this is made a year after Mean Streets and is very readable as sort of like a West Coast response to Scorsese's New York darkness. Like, so firstly, the image feels and looks lighter. It's more, but it has the same sort of rambling energy to it. But like that,
I haven't seen Mean Streets in about 15 years, and I'm currently filling all the other holes in my Scorsese filmography.
Right.
And then Mean Streets is going to be my first revisit after I finish that.
Interesting.
I don't really remember.
Very interesting. Very interested. Sorry, as to what you'll make of it, to be honest. But Mean Streets, I think, does go down that path. It's a film about debt, in which Robert De Niro is kind of trying to keep the darkness at bay by being this, sort of cavalier guy who can just sort of talk his way out of things or depend on somebody else's cachet to get him sort of out of trouble. But that obviously can only go on so long and so far. And I totally agree. This film hints at that, and in many ways is kind of a more powerful film because of it. Because it doesn't sort of give you the catharsis bottom point or end point. It just suggests that there is no end to it.
This is like a never-ending cycle.
Yeah,
that just sucks people into its orbit, and
it doesn't end with like necessarily with like a death or somebody having their toes or fingers removed or something like that. It's a bit more miserable and unpleasant, I think, as a result of that, perhaps.
Yeah,
I love it.
Sorry.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say that I think we. I think it sounds like, from what we're saying, that we both absolutely adored this movie, but I wouldn't say that. I would say that I liked it, and like I said at the outset, I ran hot and cold on it. Definitely scenes that went on too long for me. There was definitely, as I said, it was actually during the scene where they go to the boxing match, which is 45 minutes in, where I made those notes to myself, like, is this funny enough? Is there enough depth of character here? I think, as I said, 3 minutes later, it revealed what it was doing, and I was okay, I get it. Okay, yeah. I'm on board for this. I actually would have liked a lot more time with the two prostitutes. I thought the scene between I forget which one of them it was. Was it Susan? I'm not sure. I can't remember. No, Barb. Anyway, one of the Barb or Susan. Anyway, with Bill. Yeah. When the other woman comes home and they have this like moment together, I thought that was really nice and unusual.
What did you make of the scene in which Helen, played by Burt Reimers, like a transgender woman or crossdresser, let's say,
transvestite,
yeah, transvestite, visits the two prostitutes, and then Charlie and Bill return home, and this was a scene that was dread-inducing for me when the two guys come back, because I thought Gold was going to be like mocking of the transvestite of Helen, and he just wants him out, right? And the means and mechanisms by which he sort of gets the guy to leave is kind of like inclusive and fun in a way. It's like it didn't really feel like derisive or horrible or unpleasant.
Yeah, although I think Like you said in your summary that Charlie lives with two prostitutes.
Yeah.
I didn't process that, I think, when I was watching the film. I don't know, like, whether I was a little bit distracted or whether I was starting to get a little bit bored. I don't know. Maybe it's the way that you kind of have to when you're like taking notes on something that I don't know, whatever it was. Anyway, that information didn't go in.
Well, it's also a film.
I thought it was his wife and daughter. when Bill wakes up the next morning and she's serving him Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
I thought that was Charlie's wife and the young woman who comes home crying. I thought that was his daughter. I was like, his daughter? She's quite old to be his daughter.
But you still
thought,
you still gleaned the fact that they live together. Three, because it's a film that's kind of slim on exposition.
But as a result of that, with the scene that you're talking about with the transvestite, I didn't know what was going on really. I thought, I didn't really understand what was going on until a couple of scenes later when I realized that these were two prostitutes that they were friendly with.
So like what when you sort of mentioned funny ? And like you mentioned the boxing match at which Susan is seen several times clapping along to it with her eyes closed. It's little tiny details like that which I find extremely sort of endearing because they're completely superfluous as details go in terms of like plot, but they're very, very valuable to the atmosphere of the film.
I mean, Robert Altman famously said that 90% of a director's job is casting. I believe it was Altman who said that, and obviously that depends on the type of director that you are, but for Altman you can certainly see that in most of his films, and particularly here, like you cast Elliot Gould and George Segal as these characters, and then your most of your job is done at that point. Apparently Segal was quite intimidated by Gould and said to Altman, I can't keep up with him, and he was like, don't try to keep up with him, just
which I think is a great direction. But I have a pal who suggests that Mississippi Grind is a better film than this in terms of a gambling milieu, which I haven't seen. And he also,
that's the Ryan Fleck Anna Boden film, isn't it?
And he also suggests that Segal is visibly uncomfortable throughout, which is for him it's sort of a disadvantage of the film. It's to the film's discredit.
Sorry, through this film.
Yeah. Segal's visible discomfort, but like for me, that's kind of part of it. What
do you know Segal from primarily?
I don't.
Oh, really?
No.
I know him primarily from the Look Who's Talking films as Kirstie Alley's.
I haven't seen those in like decades.
Yeah. No, neither have I. But I watched them a lot as a kid. I saw them again when I was a teenager, and they're not funny at all. Like, they're really, particularly if you were like, I know that the whole point of it is like the baby's commentary, but like really everything else around that is just ridiculously terrible. But anyway, last thing I wanted to say was I was fascinated to discover that this was going to be Steven Spielberg's debut feature, and that the only thing that stopped him directing it was that there were problems with the studio that they initially brought it to. They wanted these kind of changes to make it more mainstream, and that delayed it, and they brought it to another studio, and then eventually Spielberg was offered Sugarland Express, and he took that job, and then the script was sent to Altman. So this could have been Spielberg's debut.
What could have been?
Yeah, I'm sure it would have been quite different, but because this is not the absolute plotlessness of this, or no, actually, let's just because when I said that I made a note plot ? There are elements of what you would traditionally consider plot here. You have the guy who beats them up and accuses them of colluding at the poker game, and then beats them up and robs them. He reappears later. Yeah, it's true. In I think one of the best scenes in the film, where Elliot Gould. I absolutely loved this scene where he goes into the bathroom to beat him up and take back his money because the guy has just won money at the racetrack. But the first thing that happens is he announces himself. The guy turns around, recognizes him, and decks him, and like breaks his nose, and there's blood everywhere. And then Gould gets up and they have a fight, and Gould gets the better of him. But it's such an unusual choice to just have the guy.
Because his comeuppance is delivered, but it's done in such a clumsy fashion. It feels more true in a way. Yeah, I get you.
I also got real Seinfeld vibes off the scene later on in Reno where Bill is at the table. He's playing roulette, and Charlie has no money, and he's just like hanging around, and like Charlie has like Gould has this like real Kramer kind of vibe. Bill, it's like Kramer bothering George or something.
Yeah, especially when the high stakes player shows up.
Yeah.
And Gould, Charlie realizes like that, the stakes are completely changing. It very much feels like that.
Oh, also another piece of trivia: the film was the first film to use the 8-track sound system.
Yes, I was going to mention that earlier. In fact, I should have mentioned it as soon as the excerpt finished, because for somebody who hasn't seen the film, that excerpt could be extremely difficult to follow, because there's all different kinds of sounds you can hear.
Yeah. But even in terms of like the shots of like the casino floor and a lot of that kind of stuff,
it's amazing.
Or the racetrack,
it's amazing. Yeah,
you can. The sound mix is really interesting, where you're certainly led to listen to, like there's a scene in the bar where Bill is sitting at the bar and some woman is giving out about all the men in the in the town or the casino or whatever it was, but you're kind of certainly led to listen to one conversation over another, but it's subtle, and if you want to, you can listen to another one, and it's
which I suppose
that, obviously Altman became known for. But
yeah, and in this film in particular, it compounds that early impression of the film being like this heist thing or crime caper, or because it somehow compounds the conspiratorial nature of it. Like there's so
you thought it was a crime film as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought they were in cahoots. Like I thought this was a complete performance on their part. Like because it does seem orchestrated when they're falsely accused of being together. What would you give it out of 10?
Certainly a 7. I don't know. I think maybe I only watched this yesterday. I think maybe there's a potential 8 here, but I need to give it more thought. But I'll go with a 7.
See, I gave it an 8 immediately, but then in redoing all of my ratings on my blog, because as we said in the last segment, I've changed my star system or rating system, and realized that I'd given like Altman a lot of 7s, and I felt uncomfortable having just watched this, claiming numerically at least that this is his best film so far. I've seen. I think only Nashville strikes me in retrospect or in memory.
Have you seen the
as strong as this? Yeah, I have. Yeah, but again, it's faded so much in my mind.
Have you seen The Long Goodbye?
I've got that lined up. I'm going to watch that next because of how much I enjoyed Gould. Yeah,
he's really good.
But yeah, it's an 8 out of 10 for me. Now you mentioned Look Who's Talking Now there as films that you watched as a kid, which don't hold up. I watched what we're about to discuss a lot as a kid.
Right.
Shall we move on to it?
We'll move on to Tim Burton's Beetlejuice.
Pattison. Okay, have you been studying the manual?
Well, we tried.
The intermediate interface chapter on haunting says it all. Get them out yourselves. It's your house. Haunted houses aren't easy to come by.
Well, we don't quite get it.
I heard. Tore your faces right off. It obviously doesn't do any good to pull your heads off in front of people if they can't see you.
We should start more simply, is that?
Start simply. Do what you know. Use your talents. Practice. You should have been studying those lessons since day one. Oh, I've got to go.
What about that guy in the flyer? Beetle...
Don't even say his name. You don't want his help.
Well...
We might.
No, you don't. He does not work well with others.
What do you mean?
I didn't want to bring it up. But rather than have you stumble onto it and make another mistake, I'll tell you. He was my assistant. But he was a troublemaker. He went out on his own as a freelance bioexorcist. Claimed he could get rid of the living. Got into more trouble. In fact, I believe he's been sleazing around your cemetery lately. The only way he can be brought back is by calling his name 3 times. But I strongly suggest that you remove the Dietzes yourselves.
Okay, so Beetlejuice, directed by Tim Burton, written by Michael McDowell and Warren Scarron, from a story by McDowell and Larry Wilson, produced by Wilson, Michael Bender, and Richard Hashimoto for the Geffen Film Company on a budget of $15 million and distributed by Warner Brothers. Released in the US in March of 1988 and in the UK and Ireland that August. It grossed $73.7 million, so it was a big success. It led to a spin-off cartoon that I remember a little bit of, and also a lot of merchandising, despite not really being a kids' movie as such, but we can come back to that. Okay, so the plot. When young married couple Adam and Barbara Maitland, played by Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, are killed in a car accident, they find their spirits confined to the house they inhabited in life. The Maitlands' former home is soon sold to the Dietz family, consisting of husband and wife Charles and Delia, played by Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara, and their depressed teenage daughter Lydia, played by Winona Ryder. Finding their new housemates insufferable, and unable to leave the premises without venturing into a terrifying spirit realm replete with giant predatory sandworms, the Maitlands set about trying to scare the Dietzes into leaving. After several failures, which lead to them inadvertently befriending Lydia and giving Charles and Delia business ideas for a haunted house attraction, they begin to entertain the option, against the advice of their afterlife caseworker Juno, who we heard in the clip that we just played, of calling on the spirit realm's pushiest, gnarliest bio-exorcist Beetlejuice to help them with their problems. You mentioned at the end of the last segment that you've seen this film many, many times.
Yeah, as a kid, and very infrequently since. I had action figurines from this movie, man. Honestly, like when I was 4 years old, there's video footage of me showing off my many Beetlejuice action figures to camera at an age where I had a speech impediment, so I wasn't able to pronounce consonants that required the roof of my mouth, or indeed my tongue. So they would it was a bit like Luke Skywalker and R2-D2. Only my parents could understand me, and literally no one else could. To the point where I had to have hearing tests to see if I was hearing right, etc., etc. Make up for it now, of course, because you can't shut me up. But I loved this movie. I was absolutely terrified by this film. Rewatching it recently for this episode had that uncanny, eerie vibe to it that you're sort of rediscovering a film as it's unfolding. Like images fall into place, and you're like, oh yeah. And then you find yourself beginning to sort of anticipate lines and segues into different scenes and moments, and jokes and gags start to make sense now in a way that they never did then, and it was just really weird just revisiting it. I think
that's one of the great joys of revisiting a film.
Yeah.
I saw Critters in the cinema a couple of years ago for Halloween, and hadn't seen it in 15 years or whatever. And at any given moment, if you had asked me what the next scene was, I could not, with a gun to my head, have told you. But once that scene started playing, I was like, oh yeah, and remembering the film as it unfolded.
I don't know about you with regard to Beetlejuice, but it makes it extremely difficult for me to think of it with anything resembling an objectivity. And I felt the same way when I rewatched Ghostbusters years back, and Ghostbusters 2, because again, two films of which I had every action figure in existence, at the same time at which I discovered Beetlejuice. They're obvious favourites to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe not with Beetlejuice, but it's a film I admire and love and connect with now on a very different level. But at the same time, feel like I can't even begin to engage with it critically. It's just very, very strange. It's a film that exists. It's a film that I watch and enjoy. That's it.
Well, we did Home Alone 2, so we'll give this one a shot.
Okay, fair enough. But you're a big fan of this, I'm guessing.
Yeah, although it wasn't a big film in my childhood,
right?
At all.
Okay.
But I like I said in the introduction there that I remember the spin-off cartoon being on TV, and I remember all the action figures, but I also remember RoboCop action figures and Alien and Predator action figures and Terminator action figures, and like I said, this is not really a kids movie. It's very dark, it's very weird, it's very eccentric. There is some language in it that isn't suitable for young kids. When I say kids, obviously, I would say that this is a film that is suitable for slightly older kids, 10-year-olds, maybe teenagers, certainly teenagers. but not kids who maybe are young enough to play with the kinds of toys that they were making.
Well,
but there's a weird.
Yeah, I don't remember a cartoon series. You see, and that's not to say I didn't watch it and didn't consume it, but like I'm presuming. So this film's released 88, as you said. I'm born October 87, right?
The cartoon started in 89 and ran until 91,
and this would have been,
but would have obviously run later too.
So this video footage of me, showing off the figures. Would have been...
This video footage, by the way, will be available to our highest tier Patreon members.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm up for that. This must have been like 91. So, like, I don't know if the action figures were still in vogue, or if like the cartoon series was still running at that point, or there was reruns of it. But like, it was definitely part of the kids' culture anyway. But like, I remember being completely terrified by some of the imagery in this film, and still find the lo-fi quality and effects of it deeply, deeply disturbing and terrifying. Like that sand eel and snake,
the sandworm.
Yeah, the sandworm. Sorry, that kind of comes over the dunes when Barbara exits the house as a ghost and enters another dimension, like this desert-like landscape. It's still absolutely terrifying, no?
Yeah. It's classified, I think, on IMDb. I don't think it's classified under horror. And I would agree that like the primary kind of categorization, the appropriate categorization here is comedy fantasy, dark fantasy. But it definitely has horror elements to it. But the interesting thing about the film for me is you have kind of an inverted haunting story, where, you know, like Beetlejuice brands himself a bio-exorcist, meaning that he exorcises the living. Yeah. But you have a third perspective that you wouldn't, that isn't really kind of strictly necessary to the premise, and that is the perspective of the spirit realm and Beetlejuice. You could have a story where it's the Maitlands trying to haunt the Dietzes out of their house, but because you have this third element and this kind of like rogue character in Beetlejuice who's invoked by the Maitlands to help them, but ultimately does what he wants, and does things that the Maitlands don't approve of to the Dietzes. You get the Dietzes' perspective on the goings on in the house, and that's where the horror element comes from. Is the Dietzes, because everything else I would classify as fantasy, but the horror element comes from the Dietzes' experiences of the hauntings. But again, as I said, the initial hauntings by the Maitlands, like where, you know, like Juno mentioned in the clip that we played, that they, you know, they're walking around the house, they're showing their friend the various rooms and how they're going to redecorate and everything, and they open the closet and they gasp because Gina Davis is hanging by her neck in the closet, and she screams and pulls her face off. Yeah. And then it turns out that they actually gasped because of how small the closets are. Yeah. They can't see her at all. You know, so the horrific elements are undercut with jokes and so on. But yeah, no, I definitely, and I can certainly see as a kid how it would be frightening. But the whole thing about marketing it to kids, though, is funny because, like I mentioned, Alien, Predator, RoboCop, Terminator, those films are absolutely not suitable for children. And it was like this weird moment in the late 80s, early 90s when the studios understood what they wanted to do. They just didn't understand how to do it yet. They understood that they wanted to merchandise and turn everything into a franchise, but they were still making these movies. Like, I still don't understand how you get from Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop to an action figure marketed to 7-year-olds or whatever. Like, you know, like, because obviously there was, so you take like Alien, you know, like the early 90s Alien, like you're talking about Aliens 1986 and Alien 3 1992. It was kind of those movies that I remember action figures, and they had like a whole host of them, like various aliens that had gestated inside of various different creatures. You had a dog alien and a gorilla alien, and they were all just kind of in slightly different forms. And, you know, now looking back on it, I'm like, kids had no access to the primary text. You know what I mean? Like there was no like cartoon version. Like there was a cartoon of Beetlejuice. Maybe if the kids weren't able for the movie, they could watch the cartoon. But there was no like Aliens cartoon or Alien 3 spin-off with like you know, aliens gestating inside gorillas and stuff. So it was a very weird moment where the studios were doing something that they ultimately figured out how to do later, and they made PG-13 films. They didn't try to like that doesn't happen anymore. Like they don't
Sure.
like Alien Covenant is not going to have a line of action figures marketed to 8-year-olds. It'll have expensive collectibles marketed
Sure.
to adults, but it won't have action figures. But yeah, no, it was a funny moment.
It's also it's also a time at which home video is becoming a thing and a viable option by which to consume movies. So, like, I remember there would be like a guy that would go round our estates and neighborhoods with like VHS to rent in the back of his car. And you would like a portable library, basically video library, and you would like I remember, funnily enough, believe it or not, I'm not just saying this, the film was RoboCop, and we got it out, and we couldn't play because there was fucking chocolate all over the VHS tape, and it like completely destroyed our VCR. But
so you've just disproven everything that I said about children watching RoboCop with their chocolate fingers. But it's funny though, it is, because it's like this one is more understandable. But that weird thing that was happening in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, where they were going like, okay, we know we want to make franchises and we know we want to like merchandise the shit out of everything, but the movies they were choosing to do that with, like, I understand there was an Alien versus Predator comic and things like that, and then there were video game spin-offs that the kids could play, but the inaccessibility of the primary text, it's weird,
And
anyway,
not to sort of get too nostalgic about things. But when I was rewatching this, I'm thinking to myself, I can't imagine a film like this getting made today.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking about, because the way there was supposed to be a sequel.
Yeah.
Beetlejuice Goes Hawaii was in the works and is still, as far as I know, like even a couple of years ago, Keaton and Ryder and Burton were all going to come back. And as far as I know, that's still the plan after Tim Burton makes or finishes making Dumbo. But I don't care about a Beetlejuice 2 now.
No,
and the primary reason is the primary, like, Michael Keaton is great, and I'm kind of not a huge fan of Tim Burton's more recent films, but I would actually like to see him do something kind of horror adjacent though again. But the two things that put me off of Beetlejuice 2 is that everything would be CGI, and a huge part of the appeal here is the practicality of the both production design and the visual effects. And the second thing is that Beetlejuice has less than 18 minutes of screen time in this film, and he doesn't really show up until about halfway through.
Yeah,
and that a sequel would be very, very Beetlejuice heavy.
Yeah.
And if there's a moment in this film where I start to kind of go, okay, that's enough, it's the wedding scene at the end. I'm like, okay, that's enough of Beetlejuice. It's enough of Michael Keaton's performance here. Interesting callback to a previous Habitus episode. Keaton based his performance on Chop Top from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see it.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. It's funny because you mentioned that I didn't know it was 18 minutes of screen time of an 88-minute film, something like that.
Yeah.
But one thing that had sort of entrenched itself into my memory was the fact that Beetlejuice seemed to be kind of a tertiary character. Like, I always found it odd when remembering the film that it's named after a character who isn't kind of the protagonist. Top billed, Keaton, I believe.
And he hangs over the film as a presence, like we said with like you heard in the clip.
Yeah.
Like because he doesn't show up until about halfway through, but he does have 3 brief partial appearances in the first half. We see him from behind reading a newspaper called The Afterlife and kind of mumbling to himself, but we don't see his face. Then we see, and this is how the Maitlands come to hear of him, we see a TV ad. The TV turns itself on and an ad plays, but in the ad he's in a cowboy costume performing as a kind of a cowboy character and wearing shades and a hat, and we still don't really see his face. And then the third one takes place immediately after the clip that we just played, where Juno has told him that he's been hanging around your cemetery. And I should say, the cemetery is the cemetery in the model town that Adam, Alec Baldwin's character, has been building, which I love. I love that kind of like the model inside the house with the house, and
it's great.
We get this the fly. We get a house fly flying over the model, and Beetlejuice's hands coming out of the grave, and dragging the fly in, and we hear him eating the fly. So we get he's there. And we're kind of waiting for him to show up in full.
Well, for me, the scenario of the film is more like a sitcom, which lends itself to a serial. So it's about And again, it comes back to what you said about it being sort of an inverted ghost story in which, like, it's about poltergeists who are really, really shit at being poltergeists.
Yeah.
And they can't, and so it's, you know, the quintessential sort of setup of a sitcom is that the equilibrium's restored at the end of each episode, so that, you know, the characters are kind of trapped, and then, you know, that continues into the next week. And this is about the same thing, really, in a way. And Beetlejuice as a character is sort of wanting to sort of make this into a horror film, isn't quite. He needs to be summoned. So it's quite a clever construct. It's like the character himself, after whom the film is called, is sort of wanting to intervene upon it and can't quite, because the two protagonists are Adam and Barbara, right?
That's a very bleak existentialist assessment of the form of the sitcom.
It is.
the characters are trapped and they can't escape. That's true. It's true. That's, like I said, it's a comedy haunting story from the ghost's perspective, but it has this additional third element, which is the fantasy depiction of the afterlife and of Beetlejuice, which is really, I mean, if you took that out of the film, I don't think the film would be that special. It really is the, you know, intermittent journeys into the afterlife and the kind of the bureaucratic waiting room and everything. And like you said, when she stumbles out of the house near the beginning, she tries to leave and she ends up in this like terrifying,
it's horrible
desert with the sandworms. Beetlejuice also is terrified of the sandworms, and ultimately the sandworm is what gets him. But like the original script was a horror film. And it featured Beetlejuice as a winged. I think I got this from IMDb. Featured Beetlejuice as a winged reptilian demon who transformed into a small Middle Eastern man to interact with the Maitlands and the Dietzes. Lydia was a minor character, with her 6-year-old sister Kathy being the Dietz child able to see the Maitlands. Beetlejuice's goal was to kill the Dietzes rather than frighten them away, and included sequences where he mauled Kathy in the form of a rabid squirrel and tried to rape Delia. Subsequent script rewrites turned the film into a comedy and toned down Beetlejuice into a ghost of a wisecracking con artist, rather than a demon.
He's just a pervert, right? He's a pest rather than like an actual demon.
I love this film. I think it's great.
It's a small film, right? I mean, we mentioned its length, and yet it's incredibly intricate as well within that sort of tight framework. And again, feeds into this sort of intangible thing that I nevertheless want to sort of grasp and latch onto and get to come to terms with. It feels like a film that doesn't get made anymore. You mentioned the fact that if there was a sequel, it would feel a lot more bloated than this. I imagine
they'd spend a lot of time in.
Would be...
I'm kind of imagining Burton's Alice in Wonderland or something like that, where we spend a lot of time in the afterlife, and we get to see a lot more of it, and it's all.
I mean, those like Caligari-like corridors here of like, you know, in the afterlife, they're amazing, but they also feel real. They also feel like sets, and are pokey, and you know, there's a sort of
and
character
it's stuffed. It's stuffed with detail. It's stuffed with detail, like the little glimpse we get of the window that they can look through in the corridor with the ghosts floating in what we're informed is the place where souls that have been, or ghosts that have been exorcised go. So it's like death. He says it's like death for the dead. And there's all these little dark undercurrents, and like with the fact that all the people who have killed themselves have become bureaucrats in the afterlife. We see all these like people who've hanged themselves and like cut their wrists and so on. You know, it's great. So many great little details.
One of the visual gags that I didn't get as a kid, in terms of like what had happened, like physically, is when they're speaking in the afterlife and they update their caseworker in terms of how frightening they've been, you know, their tactics, and both Barbara and Adam sort of do they basically transform their faces. Adam does it by putting his hand into his mouth, but the gag I never got is when we see what's happened to his head as a result of putting his hand in his mouth. Like, it looks like a glove, because he's reshaped his skull into like his hand.
All right.
Because he's emptied his skull out with like his hand, so you can see his thumb and fingers on the top of his head, so he looks like some kind of cockerel almost.
Oh yeah.
And I never quite got
that's kind of. I just thought it was like a beak.
Yeah,
I didn't get that this time either. But I was actually going to mention that scene because it has like this like wonderfully subtle and hilarious visual gag where he does what you've described. He turns his head into this weird kind of beak. and puts his eyes on his fingertips, but he has 10 eyes then on all of his fingertips, and then Juno is basically like asking them, show me your scariest face, like show me how you're going to scare the Dietzes out of your house, and then she turns to Barbara, and Barbara turns her head into like these crocodile jaws, and puts her eyeballs on the back of her tongue, so her eyes are looking out of her mouth, and then she turns to look at Adam, and Adam turns to look at her, but because his eyes are on his fingertips, he has to hold up his glasses and put his fingers behind the glasses to see her face. It's really good. It's great.
And the wedding scene that you mentioned, and you feel like it goes on a little bit too long. There's also something really like moving and sad about, and it's to do with the crumbling old faces of Adam and Barbara.
So sorry, let's put that in context though, because that's actually what happens is, as I mentioned in the intro, their unforeseen consequence of trying to scare the Dietzes out of the house is that the enterprising Dietzes have decided that they're going to actually turn this into some sort of haunted house attraction, and they're going to buy up the whole town and turn it into some sort of weird, like, paranormal tourist spot. So they bring their friend Otho.
Otho.
To who has like history as a medium or something like that. He is going to try to what exactly? They're having a seance to try to exorcise them.
He to summon them, I guess, because he's been reading the book that Adam acquired, coming to terms with the living, is it, or something like that? And he wants to summon them.
And then when they are summoned, they start to kind of turn into corpses. They turn into their Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin. They start to
because and that's when he realizes Otho has actually performed an exorcism rather than a seance. He's botched.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so that's kind of the climatic, or feels like it should be at that point.
Right.
In the film feels like it should be the climactic scene in the film.
So what happens then is that Lydia summons Beetlejuice on the condition. So she summons Beetlejuice to get him to save the Maitlands, and agrees in return to marry him. Which will sort of free him or something, like free him from the way that he's kind of confined. So no, I agree. I think that actually that's one of the strengths of the film. I think is that it has a lot of different it touches a lot of different tones, but it all feels like it fits together. Like there's also the storyline of Lydia and her depression and wanting to die and join the Maitlands, and like basically not so much wanting to die, but also feeling so close to the spirits of the Maitlands that she would prefer to live as a ghost with them than to live with her two, irritating and inattentive parents. By the way, Catherine O'Hara is so funny in this.
Yeah, she's great.
Her performance is hilarious. She's the funniest character, I think, in the film.
I mean, everyone's great. Everyone's
great.
Great. Even Glenn Shadix as Otho, sadly no longer with us. He's really, really great. And what do you make of the end? Like, so obviously the film has two Harry Belafonte tracks, kind of famously. And the second of which is Jump in Line, Rocky Body on Time, to which Lydia dances and floats in the air. It's a weird sort of ending.
I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure exactly what's happening in that scene, if I'm being completely honest. Because she comes home from school, presumably her actual parents are still living with them, and in fact we see them, don't we? We do. So they're living with them, and but she's the way it's presented to us is that like she's obviously closer to the Maitlands, and they're kind of her now surrogate parents, and they're all living in this kind of weird new family unit. And they're kind of quizzing her about her grades from school, and her grades are good enough. She says, so please, can I do it, or can I? She's asking permission to do something, and they eventually give her permission, and that's what she wants to do is levitate and sing this song or dance to the song.
It's such a weird end.
It's a weird one,
but I love it. I love watching.
It's great. It's great.
Is this, by the way, Danny Elfman's best score?
Ooh.
I think it is.
Oh, I don't know. He's just got so many great ones, though.
Yeah, I know, but I think this is the greatest. Honestly, now even now, thinking back to the film, like I can't help but like hum it, like the fast piano at the very beginning of the film. It's great with the brass.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole movie, it has this kind of like overstuffed, like smorgasbord kind of quality, you know. But when every like individual morsel is so delicious, it doesn't matter to me that it feels kind of like overstuffed. It's like, and also that the tone is right so that all the pieces gel.
Yeah, I agree. Even down to the sculptures that Catherine O'Hara's character has made,
and they come to life.
Yeah,
come to life. It's so good. It's great.
Let me ask you a question though. What went wrong with Burton?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because this is my second favorite of his films behind Ed Wood.
Mm-hmm.
I watched his first film, which I hadn't seen before, primarily just because, like, I don't know, I just have this like negative association with like Pee Wee Herman. And then the first 10 minutes of the film, I thought I was in for a nightmare, to be honest. But the character, once his bike gets stolen, the drop in his mood makes him a lot more tolerable. I didn't particularly care for Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but the 5 films that he made after that Stretch, Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and Ed Wood, I think are just fantastic. It's a fantastic streak. I like Mars Attacks, and I quite like I like Sleepy Hollow as well. But yeah, something happened. Like it's like he caught the Y2K virus. Like beginning with Planet of the Apes. Yeah. His best films since then. Big Fish is okay. Sweeney Todd is okay.
Oh, it's not okay.
No?
That Sweeney Todd's not okay.
Sweeney Todd, I don't know.
Honestly.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
I mean, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
But maybe it looks good by comparison. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I hated it so much. And Alice in Wonderland. I at one point. Did you ever use the website Flickchart, where you have to just choose?
Oh yeah.
Between one or another film, and it gives you a ranking of every film you've ever seen. Alice in Wonderland was the worst film I'd ever seen. Like it didn't present me with any films that I chose over Alice in Wonderland. I hated that movie, and it also kicked off this cycle of like live action fairy tale adaptations that we're living through. I don't know. Is the answer to that? I haven't seen any of his 3 most recent live action films. I didn't see Dark Shadows because it was another Johnny Depp in makeup doing a hammy performance in a Tim Burton movie. And the last 2 I'd been severely burned by.
Well, the mention of the potential of a Beetlejuice sequel, I think, has also been boosted by the idea of that Keaton is now kind of a star again. Not a star again, but like his career is definitely in a better state than what it was.
The Keatonaissance.
Yeah, and had that not happened, we might have had Beetlejuice with Johnny Depp.
Ooh,
I know. Can you imagine?
No, but yeah, I love this movie, and I can't answer what happened to Tim Burton. I don't know.
8 out of 10.
Fingers crossed for Dumbo. Now I'm going to give this one a 9. I love it.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, 8 for me.
We move on.
Yeah,
we move on to
final film. Vital. Okay.
今という時間がわからないな。僕の意識って何なのかな。これは本当はこの未来のロボットかなんかなんじゃないの。そうだ。未来のロボットがなんか人の意識とか記憶を持たされてさ、それで人間がみんな滅びた後の火星かなんかでさ。人に残されちゃってもう動かなくなる寸前にさ意識とか記憶のなんかこう電気がめちゃくちゃに流れてるんだよこれだから今ここにいるのも陽子と会ってる時間もさ全部そういう未来のロボットがなんか見せてるこう断末魔の電気信号なんだよねこ
れ Okay, so last film on this episode, Vital, or Vital.
Vital.
You say Vital, I'll say Vital. Written, produced, directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. Premiered at the Venice Film Festival September 2004. released in Japan that December and was released here in September of 2005, which is when I saw it. I saw it in the cinema then. So, after a tragic car accident in which his girlfriend Ryoko, played by Nami Tsukamoto, is killed, Hiroshi Takagi, played by Tadanobu Asano, suffering from total amnesia, finds himself drawn back into the medical studies that he had previously abandoned to the disappointment of his parents. As in, he had abandoned it to the disappointment of his parents. When he embarks on his 4-month dissection module, he finds himself presented with the cadaver of a young woman who begins to remind him of Ryoko and their accident. Eventually, he comes to recognize the tattoo on the cadaver's arm and realizes that it is in fact the body of his dead girlfriend, which drives him into an obsessive pursuit of his lost memories in the tissues of her body. So, I saw this, as I said, in the cinema September, October 2005, and I hadn't seen it since. And at that time, I was looking forward to it because I had recently, over the kind of couple of years before that, become a fan of Tsukamoto, whose work I discovered. I think we mentioned Tsukamoto on our Darren Aronofsky episode when we were talking about Pi, because I definitely think that Aronofsky was a Tsukamoto fan, a fan of films like Tokyo Fist and Tetsuo. I encountered Tsukamoto because I was looking for films similar to Eraserhead. And Tetsuo, the Iron Man from 1989, kept coming up on on those lists. And he's one of the kind of, along with like Takashi Miike and people like that, the kind of like the kind of filmmaker whose films were released in this part of the world as part of the Tartan Asia Extreme DVD label. I absolutely adored this film in 2005, to the extent, in fact, that I walked out of it with this like feeling of like, I have to make films and I want to make films like that. I hadn't seen it since, as I said. I watched it a couple of days ago for the second time and I still like it quite a bit. Doesn't give me that feeling anymore though. And I certainly don't want to make films like this anymore. Have you seen any other Tsukamoto films?
No, none. And this film was only very vaguely on my radar as a result of that. I know what you mean. I can see why you would want to make films after seeing it, because it promotes texture and meaning over, I think, like what we understand to be sort of mainstream storytelling.
Sure.
And actually, it's weird because obviously he's made this at a point in his career at which he's extremely experienced as a filmmaker and a storyteller. Weirdly, though, it feels very film schooly to me, or very undergrad. It's the kind of, I mean, there's that scene there's a love scene flashback in a forested area at some point, and like the fucking guitar and piano score over it. I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here, man? Like, what? Like, just very sort of basic things like that for me, if I didn't know the director, I would think, well, this is obviously like a first-time director who's working on a minuscule budget and lacking the confidence to let like images speak for themselves. Despite that, though, it's got a beautiful, beautiful tone to it that's extremely controlled and withheld, and sustained over the course of what I think is only an 85-minute runtime.
77 minutes. 77 minutes plus credits. So the actual film is 77 minutes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, like, so on another level, it's sort of almost, I could, what I'm like, and I do this more than you do. I can justify form in ways that are unintended because it matches the material. But like, you could argue here that like his own sort of prolonged adolescence as a student who's returned to that sort of milieu sort of justifies the kind of, if you like, childlike qualities, or not childlike qualities, the sort of amateur qualities of the filmmaking at points.
Right. I mean, it is a very low budget film. What's interesting to me about this, though, and has always been kind of mysterious to me, is that this isn't that well liked by other Tsukamoto fans. Like, the opening shot of the movie is this chaotic, like multi-exposed image of smokestacks to this like really intense music. That, along with like maybe 2 or 3 other moments in the movie, are sort of signature Tsukamoto. Where you have like, okay, Tetsuo body hammer, Tokyo Fist and Bullet Ballet and things like that. But the film that he made before this, A Snake of June, had shown him kind of moving more into like a kind of quieter, more contemplative, introspective kind of direction. And this was a further step in that direction, and that spoke to me much more than the chaotic cyberpunk stuff that he made his name with. Even though I am a big fan of the original Tetsuo. The film he made after this was called Nightmare Detective, and it almost it was a weird as a concept. It felt like an effort to go mainstream, but the form was the same as any other Tsukamoto film. So it felt like it's like a detective who can go into people's dreams and solves crimes that way or whatever. I actually haven't seen anything he's done since then, but no, I get all the stuff that you're saying there. But for me, when I saw this in 2005, like, okay, so you have a novel, like a novel premise, like the amnesiac who encounters the corpse of or the cadaver of his dead girlfriend and proceeds to try to find, by exploring her remains, try to piece together his mind. But you don't have a plot beyond that, nor is it character. So it's not plot driven, but nor is it character driven, because the central character is such a cipher. So you have this novel premise that evokes kind of fundamental metaphysical questions. Like obviously, like it's a mind-body theme about like impermanence, but also more specifically about like the ontological status of memory. Like what is a memory? Like the loneliness of an unshared memory, and like how we exist in the memories of others, and how ourselves and our sense of our own selves are bound up with the others' perception and remembrance of us, and the extent to which we as individuals are constituted by the other people in our lives, and how they see us and how they think of us and remember us, like intersubjectively constituted objects in the minds of other subjects, and like a thought, the way in which a thought or a feeling, like my thoughts and feelings are thoughts and feelings to me, but if I were to share them with you, they're not thoughts and feelings to you, they're objects in your mind. And the way in which we become objects in the minds of other people. And then that's also extrapolated to the species as a whole at some point, where they talk about the last robots on Mars, and the last memory of the last consciousness in the universe, like the universe as an object in the minds of observers, and the theme of extinction. So you have that is all just like there in the premise, right? Before you do anything else, and then you build out from that core premise, but not in a plot or character driven fashion, in a sort of a more instinctual and abstract way, where you kind of go, well, okay, I like this idea and I want to follow that thread. What's a way to do that symbolically? What's the way to do that with an image? So that was kind of that approach to filmmaking that was neither plot driven nor character driven, but sort of impulse and idea driven.
I get
was
that.
Was what appealed to me so much, and still does to a certain extent. But I definitely like the idea of him restructuring his memory of her and of himself by exploring her body. Because
I feel like everything you said there to describe that film, before you mention and you branch off from that in a way that isn't character or plot driven or not meant to be read as such, could equally apply to something like Phoenix, which we covered a few episodes back, which you didn't respond very positively to. In fact, you actively disliked that film because I'd recommended it. But
no, on my new scale, I gave it a 5, which means neither like nor dislike.
Oh, it's gone up. It's gone up.
No, I got a 5 on that episode.
So, like, let's say we can discern a difference in what you then do with that material, because for me, obviously, then Phoenix sort of proceeds on a level that's intending to be understood in terms of its plot, which obviously stretches credulity for you. But But this is, and I agree, it's a lot more sort of texture based, and bordering on abstract in a way. Like, and it's worked into the imagery of the film in terms of like the illustrations with the drawing. That is it the protagonist that draws, or his new sort of romantic?
Yeah, he draws the kind of Leonardo da Vinci style sketches.
Yeah, and so they're like anatomical, right? But that's also mirrored in the actual movement of like the cutting of the skin and the flesh of the cadaver. And so you get like a fabric that's thematized in the film. But is it also fair to say, neutrally or otherwise, that this film is very much sort of subtext heavy?
I don't think that the text subtext thing even really applies very heavily here. It's as though when we talked about Blind Beast, it's as though the entire film was the last 20 minutes.
Sure.
Where it's just like there's no like the distinction is almost obliterated. But very much so. Like I said, like you I mean, so much of it is I mean, you could say this about everything really, but it's so subjective in terms of the kind of like questions and themes that you are personally drawn to, and this is very much the kind of thing that I'm drawn to. Like when I said I wanted to make films like this in 2005, what has changed is the form, not the theme.
Sure.
For me, you know what I mean. So the you have a film driven by ideas, but they're by a novel idea. Driven by ideas emerging from a novel premise. But the ideas, it's not like a novel idea or novel ideas as in, a high concept genre film where it's not like a what if kind of scenario, even though it technically kind of is. It's a novel scenario that evokes and explores what are very familiar ideas, like they're sort of like fundamental metaphysical questions that are very, very old. And I think that the evocation of the Da Vinci anatomy textbooks and all that kind of stuff is quite intentional. Well, we won't only get into intentions, do we? No.
Do you find that the film is humorous in any way? Not that it needs to be, but do you?
Humorous?
Because there's a moment in which Mr. soon-to-be Dr. Takagi says, "I'm confused about time," and I just started laughing out loud because I felt like is it giving us permission that we're also meant to be completely confused by the time frame and temporality of this film?
Well, that's the clip that we just played. It was in Japanese, but where that's where he's talking about that's where he introduces the theme of the last robot on Mars. He talks about what he said. He asks himself, "What is my consciousness?" And he's talking to his father, and his father is trying to get him to give up what he's doing, to stop dissecting the body of his girlfriend. Like there's a version of this. He says that he's going to call the professor and get him to get Ryoko's body taken away, and Takagi says, or Hiroshi rather says, "If you do that, I'll kill you." Like it's like an existential, like crusade for him. Like he this is the only thing that makes sense for him to do. But in answer to your question about whether it's funny or not, I do think some of the moments where he's the other students that he's paired up with are getting a little bit weirded out by his obsessive behavior with the corpse, with the cadaver. I keep on saying corpse. And there's a scene later on. The weakest side of the movie is the other girl. Played Ikumi. No, sorry. Kiki is the name of the actress, and Ikumi is the name of the character. Kiki is all she's credited as here. Not much comes of that. I think that could be kind of set aside. But there's a scene where, so basically the premise, it's sort of the way it's expanded and elaborated is it pushes the characters into psychologically difficult and unusual behaviors and relationships. So obviously, like in terms of Hiroshi, his behavior with the cadaver, but also when he tries to reconnect with Ryoko's parents, and we see like their reaction to him and how they blame him, but then there's a scene where I believe it's Ryoko's father comes to the autopsy room and it gives this like really heartfelt kind of like talk. It's like the way that somebody would talk to a grave in a graveyard, but he's talking to her cadaver, like her physical remains. And there's something about that. Like we talked about that. I avoided spoiling an aspect of The Eyes of My Mother on our end of year episode, and I'm not going to do it here, but similar kind of things in that movie that I just find so powerful. And also there's a scene, a movie that I wanted to cover on the show, and we will do at some point, is Jane Campion's In the Cut. There's a scene in that.
Yeah, I almost chose that film for an episode recently, but so we will get to it at some point. But I know the scene. I know the scene.
Very underrated, and there's a scene in that like when I saw that movie, it just like I found it like just so almost like stop my breath. It's so powerful. So that obviously that's just me. That's just something that I really respond to, is that kind of melancholy confrontation with mortality in that melancholy way.
Sure, it's a melancholy that is rooted in the tension between physical limitations and where life ends, right?
Yeah.
And I found, stemming from that, the final shot, I think, of this film, extremely powerful. The idea of a memory of a part of a life revisited years after.
Yeah.
And the ungraspability of that. Just which I that's more what I'm sort of gravitating towards in this film. Like, right. It's very, very similar. The themes sort of brush up against one another and interrelated, but like the irretrievability of a life or irretrievability of a relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, like, to explore that premise, Ryoko doesn't have to be dead at the beginning of the film. It could just be a breakup or whatever else.
Yeah.
But that's very much emphasized here, or underscored in a very bodily way, which I find interesting.
In a way that could be, in The Eyes of My Mother is much more sort of morbid and macabre, whereas and in The Cut much more shocking and violent.
Sure.
But in this one is relocated kind of from its sort of if you think of like, you think of death, you think of like a dead body, you think of like, burial and things like that. Here it's in a clinical environment, so it doesn't have that kind of what he's doing to her body. If he was doing it in his apartment, would be extremely morbid and disturbing. But the fact that he's doing it in a like carrying out exactly the same process, exactly the same explorations of her body, almost like oblivious to the disapproval of all the people around him. He's so I mean, he's exploring her like her skin and her organs and her musculature, and we're getting this cut away to memory or an imagining of a day that they spent on the beach where she's dancing. So you're seeing this like this contrast between a living body in motion and its remains. And the actress Nami Tsukamoto, I'm assuming is Shinya's daughter or maybe niece. I guess I couldn't determine, but she's a professional ballet dancer.
Yeah.
But presumably daughter or niece.
It's a reasonable assumption. There's that scene.
It's her only film credit as well.
So there's that sort of dance, and I put it in quotation marks, dance scene in the derelict building as well, which is sort of a performance piece. Weird, moving, beautiful, borderline juvenile as well, and sort of takes us back into that territory of this feeling a little bit like an undergrad film school product. But it kind of works at the same time as it doesn't work. There's a genuine sincerity to this, and a sort of sensory intimacy that is conjured through it. But I feel like it's also the only kind of film that an 18-year-old would make, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't feel like the human manifestation, or the manifestations of the actual memories that are conjured through what I think is a very vividly, robustly evoked scenario, as far-fetched as it is. The memories that are prompted by that scenario are like somebody's cliched idea of a relationship, you know? And, you know, I say that knowing fine well that Malik does it as well in stuff like To the Wonder, you know, To the Wonder, where you've got, sure, like, you know, Olga Kurylenko, like, you know, running down shopping aisles and, you know, being this, like, you know, free-floating waif who is kind of really irritating, to be honest. But, again, there's a sincerity there, and it's like, you know, of course the memory's going to be of two people on a beach with nobody else around, but it's like, do you know what I mean? It feels like somebody's idea of a relationship rather than something that feels or was lived in.
So you're assessing the maturity of the 43-year-old Shinya Tsukamoto when he made this film.
It's his most mature work to date, of course, but
that's what a lot of critics said about it at the time. It's so mature. Yeah,
but but then
I don't disagree with that. Yeah, but
I have to counter it by saying there's a sincerity there. So, you know, it's just something maybe that I just don't connect to, that strand of the film or that thread.
Yeah, but no, like, I mean, like to me that works more like the film would certainly be stronger if there was more of an emotional connection to Hiroshi and Ryoko's relationship.
Yeah,
Ryoko's kind of annoying, I think. in those memories, she's a little bit irritating, and there's a whole thing about her wanting to die as well, right? So I don't know. There's a few additional. There's also kind of like what feel like kind of vestigial elements from previous Tsukamoto films that don't really fit in here. Like it's the whole thing of like, you know, like the nightmare of the city and in industrialization that come kind of more from his cyberpunk films, and like the contrast of like, you know, nature and physicality and tactility on the one hand, and the city and kind of alienation and clinical empty spaces, and like there's a montage of shots near the beginning after Hiroshi wakes up from his coma where he's kind of just like almost like a ghost kind of floating around in different spaces, just kind of doing nothing and just like existing in these kind of alienating urban spaces. The film, actually, I don't think I was aware of this film project when I saw this the first time, but it was only when I watched it again that it reminded me of Peter Greenaway's film that he never made, that was supposed to be the third in a series that began with, I think it was with Prospero's books, and then was followed by The Baby of Masson.
Right.
I don't think it was ever given a title, but it was set during the 30 Years' War, and it was about an anatomist searching for the physical location of the human soul in the body.
Right.
And it was supposed to be a cast of all over 65-year-old British actors, and it was also supposed to involve themes of like necrophilia. And because they couldn't, Greenaway said because they couldn't afford, they knew that they wouldn't be able to afford all of the expensive prosthetics and like visual effects that they need to like show autopsy after autopsy after autopsy. Because this was a time when, this is a time early enough in medical history where autopsy was considered defiling the corpse. It was considered like in violation of like Christian doctrine. So they were taking the opportunity afforded to them by the great number of corpses being produced by the war to explore human anatomy. But because he knew that they probably wouldn't be able to secure funding that would allow them to show all of these like visual effects, they were going to shoot it almost in the dark. So he said, you know, the prospect of a film featuring all over 65 British actors, themes of necrophilia shot in the dark was not particularly attractive to financiers. That was like around 2000, I think, after 8.5 Women. And he said, but don't worry, we'll make it someday, but it hasn't materialized yet. And he's still planning on killing himself when he's 80, so. And very quickly on the title, I mentioned at the top that I have always pronounced it Vital as opposed to Vital. And that's because of an interview that I read, I think, with Tsukamoto. I think it was on Twitch Film back in 2005 or 2006. And he said that he had been inspired by reading about the concept of élan vital. And that's the reason that I've always called it vital. But the concept of élan vital is to do with evolution and to do with, appealing to a sort of supernatural spirit force that powers the evolutionary process, as opposed to vitalism, which is to do with the doctrine that the distinction between living things and non-living things can't be explained purely by appeal to the mechanistic processes of nature, and requires an appeal to some sort of vital force that animates living things, like the sort of thing that Frankenstein is about. And the latter seems to apply more to the themes of this film than Élan Vital does. So I might be mistaken. I don't know. I couldn't find that interview to substantiate it, or anyway. I enjoy this movie, but I definitely didn't love it the way that I did in 2005. And one thing that I was there was much less like crunchy, squishy autopsy footage in it than I remembered. Very little of it,
It's there early on, it's there early on, all the squelching and all that.
Like the breaking of the rib cages and stuff like that.
Yeah. But then, and then the sound in the second half of the film that I seem to remember is just the scratchy of the pencils on paper more than the actual dissection stuff.
Sure. Have you seen the short film Aftermath, the horror film from the 90s, where the guy... the
I have not.
Short film?
No.
Right. It's about a mortician, or whatever you call them, who is left alone with the body of a young woman who has just died in a car crash, and he has sex with her body and cuts it apart and does all this sort of stuff to it, and then puts her all back together and takes her heart home and feeds it to his dog. It's kind of a cult.
Hell, that sounds like a barrel of laughs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And where might one encounter this short horror film?
It's kind of a cult. I have it on DVD along with the director's other shorts. He made a film called Genesis as well a couple of years later. But
who's it by?
Nacho Cerda.
Ah, right, okay.
Spanish director.
I don't know it.
Only made one feature called The Abandoned. But it's I don't know, along similar lines. Yeah. So what would you give this out of 10?
I give it 6.
6?
Yeah.
I would give it a 7.
The what you mentioned, the opening with the chimney stacks and that weirdly heightened music and everything, I thought, oh wow, this is going to be great. I loved all that.
Right.
But you see, I naturally gravitated towards that kind of image.
Okay. You should check out Tsukamoto's earlier films, like even A Snake of June that he made 2 years before this, but certainly his cyberpunk films, like the first 2 Tetsuos.
Right.
Tetsuo the Iron Man and Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer.
Tetsu the Iron Man with Tony Stark. Is it Richard Robert Downey Jr.? It's Richard Downey Jr. Oh man. Nah, 6 out of 10, but definitely enthused enough to see Tsukamoto's other works.
They're all of similar duration anyway, so they're not big commitments.
Excellent. Good to know.
Okay, we wrap it up there?
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been the Habitus. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Twitter, Stitcher, Tinder, Grindr.
Tune in.
Plenty of fish.
Bumble.
Yeah. And please, subscribe, rate, review. If you want to help us out, you could leave reviews on iTunes. That's what they say on all the other podcasts. I've never
Is that
done
what
it,
they
so
say?
You probably won't either. Yeah, it helps you show up in
say?
the rankings and stuff.
Oh, does it?
So thumbs up on YouTube, share, like, subscribe, smash that like button.
Swipe right.
Swipe right. I've been Bobby Lowe. He's been
Michael Pattison.
And this has been the Habitus episode 14. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.